So what does a forest fire have to do with connection codes and our emotions? I got a little story that kind of ties it together and see that this is the way things work in the real world. So starting in the early 1900s with the different national parks, and particularly I'm thinking of Yellowstone because that's the perfect example that I've got. The Forest Service, one of their goals was to stop forest fires. You remember the Smokey the Bear and all that stuff. So what they would try to do when a fire got started, they would try to immediately put it out, suppress the fire, not let the forest burn. And they did this for years and years and years, decades and decades. And what happened over that time is fuel built up in those areas where things weren't burned. There's a natural cycle for stuff to burn and regrow and burn and regrow in small amounts. So in 1988, a big fire got started in Yellowstone and it totally got out of control. And it burned the park. Because of the amount of fuel, the fire was so hot that there was literally permanent damage in a lot of areas. I remember going through there 20 or 30 years after that and seeing trees that were still standing that were semi-petrified because the fire had been so hot that the tree that's still standing there, but it had burned and been dead for 25 or 30 years. So it's kind of cool because my wife and I were actually there on our honeymoon and tried to see parts of Yellowstone, and there's places we couldn't even get to because of the fires and stuff. So it's something I have firsthand experience with. But the way it ties into connection codes is what they had done is they'd suppressed the fires. They'd said, oh, we can't have forest fires. They're a bad thing, even though they're part of a natural cycle. So they suppressed until there was so much fuel built up that when the fire got started, it got out of control and they couldn't contain it. Did horrible damage. Same thing happens in a lot of marriages. When those emotions get suppressed and suppressed and suppressed, the fire starts and everybody does what they can to get the fire put out as quick as possible instead of letting it burn a little. So the principle of the connection codes is to let it burn a little at a time, which is what they now do with Yellowstone and a lot of the forest and national parks. They let them burn in small areas. They try to manage them and control them, but let this stuff burn so that they're more or less mimicking the natural cycles that are there. And so, again, we do the same thing with our emotions. When you're experiencing an emotion, you can let it burn for the 19 seconds it's supposed to be there because it's sending you a message. Let it happen. And yes, it may cause a little bit of smoke, a little bit of a fire, and do a little bit of damage. But if you don't do that for decades and decades, then you occasionally will get these horrific fires that do horrific damage. And I wonder literally how many divorces have been caused because the little fires, the little emotions were suppressed and put out immediately instead of getting down to the bottom of it, burning through, so to speak, the emotions that had been piled up and letting them to be dealt with so that then the healthy regrowth could happen instead of a fire that burns so hot that it destroys things. It kills the seeds that are in the ground. It just did horrible damage that it takes decades to recover from. So it's just fascinating how you see things like that the connection codes teaches us, and you see in the natural world, in the literal forest, the same kind of process. So that's what you want to do is let those little fires happen. Process those emotions. Let that little disconnects happen between spouses or friends or whoever. Process those emotions. Explain the hurt, the shame, the fear, the whatever you had. Process it, and then it sort of goes away, or mostly goes away, burns down, and it's manageable instead of just suppressing until it gets so big that it's unmanageable and does horrible damage. So any questions, get in touch with me. Thank you.